Welcome, everyone. My name is Tim Byun. I serve as the CEO of OKCoin USA Inc. As you can see, our office is relatively new. We've turned on our platform 8 months ago. And so there's 20 strong OKCoin colleagues. I first want to acknowledge them, because without them, we wouldn't have tonight. So maybe you could all raise your hand real quick. There's 20 of us. All right. Just a quick note on the 20. I'm very fortunate that, as you may know, OKCoin started in Beijing, China in 2013. And I don't speak Chinese. So it's very difficult for me, but we have highly competent, talented, bilingual, trilingual colleagues. And we make it happen by working with our head office in Beijing. We also have an office in Hong Kong that we opened up in 2014 to serve a US dollar market, in addition to 2013 with the RMB. Well, fast forward, you know what happened with the RMB. The domestic exchange was closed in 2017 via a tap on the shoulder by the PBOC. But we are strong in working our US dollar exchange. And so if you have not signed up on okcoin.com, please do so. All right, my last plug of okcoin.com. I want to open up this evening by sharing that we have an excellent topic, excellent speakers, and it's actually going to be a great learning environment for all of us. You know, today's market reminds me of 2014. Back then, it was a rough drought, and it was actually pretty long. And so I think we're kind of witnessing similar time periods, but this is where, you know, it's a little quieter. This is where we should do our homework. This is where OKCoin should make our platform better. And so that's what we're focusing on. And tonight, it's all about Decred. I'll just introduce my colleague, Alex Feinberg, a little known, interesting history of Alex, professional baseball player, professional dancer, especially at a Chinese New Year skit routine. You can ask him later about that. But more importantly, no, we don't want him performing tonight. More importantly, he spearheaded our launch of our premier program. It's for sophisticated traders, entities, as well as individuals. We are providing dedicated liaisons to you sophisticated traders. And so it's a great program. More details on our website, but it provides fast fiat settlement, as well as I mentioned, tailored individual service, and probably the lowest fees. But Alex would know best. But please welcome Alex Feinberg.
Thank you, Tim. Professional dancer contingent on payment, I suppose. Thanks for having me up. As Tim mentioned, we are rolling out the Premier program. Feel free to grab me after the discussion if you'd like to hear more. But essentially, we're friends with everyone in the community. We want to make ourselves accessible. And for professional traders or sophisticated traders who have the capacity to trade maybe a little bit above what most individuals might trade, we want to make sure that you guys always have a line of communication to us. Want to make sure that you're always able to deposit and withdraw funds. And if there's any issues, you can pick up the phone and call us or email us. And we want to be competitive in any way we can, which obviously does include fees. But you know, I'm sure you came to hear from more than just us. And so, Chris and Alex, why don't you come up? From Placeholder Venture Capital. Some of the early folks in the space, I will let them introduce themselves, and then we can get to talking.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm a researcher at Placeholder.
And I'm Chris, and I'm a partner at Placeholder.
I feel like you could tell folks a little bit more about your prominence in the space. That's a little bit short, I would say.
Well, go ahead. So Placeholder is a venture capital firm in New York that is focused exclusively on crypto, and to this point, exclusively through the native assets of the networks that we work with, though that may change. Our focus very much to date has been on governance, and we've stayed relatively disciplined in investing in a series of assets and networks that we believe will be differentiated on the basis of governance.
And what were you doing before Placeholder?
I was at a corporate venture capital fund called Lowe's Ventures.
So Alex gave the intro on Placeholder. I guess a little bit on my background. I got my professional start in the industry at a firm called ARK Investment Management. ARK in 2015 became the first public fund manager to invest in Bitcoin. I later published a book in the space that some of you may know called Crypto Assets, and then have founded Placeholder with Joel Monegro and Brad Burnham. And Alex is one of our earliest employees.
Great. So, given everybody's here to chat Decred, maybe you can give us a little bit of background, why you saw it was a good investment, what your favorite aspects of the project are.
Sure. So I went down the Decred rabbit hole when I was still at ARK, so pre-Placeholder. It was first Willy Woo, who some of you may know from Twitter, who was poking me on it, and then Charlie Lee tweeted about it at some point in 2016. He tweeted a list of assets that he thought had real utility and differentiation, and it was Bitcoin, of course, Litecoin, Monero, and then Decred. I forget what the fifth was, but the combination of Willie and Charlie got me to look more closely. I think one of my first realizations was the quality of the team. Jake underplayed it a little bit, but the BTC Suite, which was an alternative full node implementation of Bitcoin Core, was written in Golang. On all accounts, it was as quality an implementation as Bitcoin Core was. And realizing that here was a Bitcoin Crade development team that had chosen to leave to build something that they felt improved upon Bitcoin was compelling. That has since evolved into, say, a more formal thesis where we think of Bitcoin as being hypersecure, adaptable, and sustainable. So the combo of proof of work, proof of stake actually makes it on a on-par basis more expensive to attack than proof of work alone. In terms of the adaptability, every network has to make decisions. It's just a matter of how you go about making those decisions. And Decred has put in place a framework to allow a decentralized set of actors to efficiently make decisions. And that allows it to evolve and adapt in an efficient manner. And then the sustainable aspect is Decred's treasury currently has 600,000 units of DCR. At current market prices, that's a $10 million treasury, but of course very dependent upon the price of Decred. But what I really like and what I really liked when I was first going deep on Decred was there was no ICO, there was no exogenous injection of capital. What the Decred team did to capitalize themselves is they did an initial airdrop, 4% to whoever signed up, and then 4% to their treasury, which then allowed them to fund operations combined with the goodwill of Company Zero to start. But then from there, the entire capitalization of the network has been based on capital appreciation of DCR itself. So there was never any investment that was taken in. It's all grown out of the utility of the network being reflected in the price of the asset and therefore capitalizing the operations of the network.
So from my perspective, I don't think I was following Charles. I think I missed the memo on Decred at some point in 2017, but I got to know Chris, and then I was interviewing at Placeholder, and the challenge that was given to me was, why don't you look into a network and let us know what you think of it, and we actually have an idea for what that might be, so why don't you look at Decred? And I really hadn't heard much about Decred at the time, and you didn't tell me that you guys held Decred, so I could have gotten that one very wrong, and I probably wouldn't be here today, though.
You would still be
Presumably,
here.
yeah, presumably there'd be some objectiveness to that if I came out super bearish on Decred. But what really caught my eye is I decided the way I decided to go with that was to look at what was going on in the Decred network, what was going on in terms of the ticket pool and ticket activity on the proof of stake side, what was going on with miners, and then what was going on across the ecosystem. And really there were a few things that really stood out. About 40% of supply of Decred was locked in proof of stake, and there was significant engagement on both the governance and the voting on the protocol. Decred had implemented the prior year a change in their essentially their proof of stake difficulty algorithm that prices tickets at every block. And Jake didn't go into this in a lot of depth, but the upshot was it was extremely volatile. Ticket prices were very volatile, and the community really stepped up in a very big way to change that, and that was pretty impressive. And so I looked at that, and then there was, at that point, there was sort of rumors about ASICs coming online, and I think hash rate had like doubled or something, and looked set to like explode, which it did ultimately, going up something like 100x or something.
100x in the last year.
So just looking at it objectively, I came out of it, and then I got on a call with Chris, and he's like, well, you didn't tell me if you're bullish or not, because I tried to sidestep the question, but I said, well, I came out pretty excited about it. And then I realized that the sort of placeholder had accumulated a position in DCR. So I was glad I was able to research it sort of from an objective standpoint, I thought, and then sort of align and come to my own conviction on the asset. So that was exciting to me, and that's how I came to appreciate Decred.
Well, you shared a little bit about the network and spoke a little bit about the ecosystem in 2017, 2018. Looking forward, next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, how do you see the crypto ecosystem broadly evolving, and what place would you see Decred having in that?
Hard question. I think that, for us right now, we're focused on developer tools and networks, and then for the, say, mainstream use cases, those being financial. Really, blockchains are natively financial technology that collapse the cost of asset creation, custody, and transfer. And I would argue that a lot of the, say, more technology-geared crypto networks, their success is contingent upon us nailing the financial components and making this just much easier for users to onboard and use. And so I'd like to think that, well, hopefully our investment focus will dovetail with where we're seeing real traction. Where does Decred fit within that? I think Decred has one of the most elegantly constructed supply sides in the whole industry, where it's taking into account the hardware that performs consensus through proof of work, the stakeholders that make decisions, and then also the code creators, which I consider a form of supply-sider. And it is compensating all of those supply-siders. And it's constructed a elegant system of checks and balances to make sure that no single supply-sider can run away with the keys to the network and the control to the network. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that model. And generally, when I have conversations with engineers and explain Decred's supply side, they'll get excited and go and take learnings from it. Jake mentioned that Politeia can easily be ported onto another blockchain. Potentially, it gets extended through Decred itself, and Decred becomes a governance chain where people are anchoring their voting, money, and transparency decisions all through Decred. So I think it's more of an open slate in terms of how Decred may work in.
Yeah. So from our perspective, a lot of what we end up thinking about and talking about internally, obviously we're a venture capital fund, so we think on 10-year horizons typically, and so that's very much how we think about the assets in our portfolio, and very much what drives us to this idea of governance as a differentiator. And so for me, that's where Decred comes in that I don't think standing here in 2018 we can pre-specify all the features or all the community aspects that will make a network like Decred successful. Really what we can do is we can specify the processes through which we can arrive at the right answers when those become apparent to us. So those things could be surrounding privacy, they could be surrounding how networks promote themselves, they could be any number of things. Really what we can do is specify the ways through which as a community we come together and decide on those things in a way that doesn't leave us kind of in the situation that Jake described, where we're simultaneously debating on what the right answer should be, and then also debating on what process we should use to arrive at the answer. Because of course, right, in that situation, let's say miners and stakers or miners and wallets disagree on how you should make a decision, right? Miners will say, well, no, just leave the decision to whoever has the most hash power. Wallets, potentially exchanges will say, leave the decision to whoever custodies the most coins at any given time, right? So we can't be having those debates. We need to specify the ways in which we're going to reach decisions a priori. And so I think that's something that's incredibly differentiating for Decred, in that they've created incredible clarity around how the community will resolve disputes in the future. And then the other thing that comes to the 10-year thesis for Decred is the way that they've specified the ability of the protocol to be sustainable. So what happens to a lot of the protocol teams once the money runs out, right? Do we end up in a situation like what Jake described, where he's building a full node implementation, an alternative full node implementation for Bitcoin and not getting compensated? Or do we have mechanisms for those teams to sustainably fund themselves as they do so? So those are the things that I think really will differentiate Decred beyond the 24-month period and into the decades to come.
So Alex, you touched on dispute resolution. Recently in October 2018, there was a change made to give stakeholders control of the Decred treasury. How would you see that playing out? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages that you would see based on that decision?
So we think it's a brilliant experiment in the way crypto networks govern themselves, and I think it goes to this idea of sustainability. That we specified a process where if we want, let's say to hire a PR firm to get the word out about the asset, like how do we decide that as a community, right? Like what does it mean for like a crypto network to have a PR firm, right? Like this is like completely uncharted territory. So we think that there's advantages to the clarity in that process, the way Decred has specified Politeia, so that we have sort of an open process through which we debate things and keep people accountable, right? If you said something at some time, it will be timestamped on Decred, and then you won't be able to go back and say, well, I didn't say that, right? The way that the system engenders accountability, I think, is one of its real advantages. In the long run, we're going to have to figure out a number of things, and I think it's going to be an interesting experiment. We very much look forward as a holder of Decred to participating in that process and helping the community arrive at those answers.
We do participate.
We do. That's right.
I want to emphasize the point of accountability because what's great with Politeia is there's a ledger for all conversations and all decision making that is immutable. And if you enter, say, the crypto space in 2019, there's a lot of revisionist history that happened in the years past, which is hard to see and keep track of with a lot of different networks if they don't have some immutable record to keep track of how decisions were made and what went into that process. And I think a great example is what's happened to Reddit between our BTC and our Bitcoin. And for me, that was a learning in terms of understanding how brittle some of the communication platforms are around coordination. And yes, the communication platforms shift, but it's hard for, and so in the shifting, the core team is able to remain in sync. But I think it's hard for new people coming to the space, of which the vast majority is in front of us if crypto is to go mainstream. It's hard for people coming to the space now in 2019 to know where do I go to get the ledger of record on everything that's happened with the network. And so Decred is really planned out from day one of being able to have that history. So I think that's a super important component that will benefit it more and more and more.
Yeah, I think over the last several minutes, you both alluded to various ways that you're evaluating the success of the project. How would you look at what's important? I think Alex, you alluded to paying attention to various ecosystem developments. Oh, but then Chris, it seems like you were also alluding to network participation. So I think there's obviously many ways that one can evaluate success. What metrics are you guys looking at to determine how things are going?
Sure. So I think you can break it into the supply side and the demand side. So supply side would be, like I was saying earlier, the miners, the stakers, and the developers. Miners, we have ASICs coming online. Right now for Decred is kind of like what 2013 was for Bitcoin, where you just have hash rate going through the roof. I believe hash rate is up over 100x over the last year, and that's in a down market. Staking, prices of tickets are up about 40% year over year. Some of that is inflation based, but it's the price appreciation of tickets has outpaced inflation. So it means people increasingly valuing the ability to govern Decred as a network, and also the yield of earning new DCR in that process. In terms of the, and then you have 48% of DCR outstanding is staked. And then on the developer side, there's a great publication comes out every month, Decred Journal, that outlines everything that's going on with Decred. And I think if you stay abreast of that, you'll see how active the development is on Decred. Their roadmap is public as well, with things like Lightning Network and privacy. In terms of the demand side, I think the demand side is the question mark still for Decred. And I think the demand side is question mark for a lot of crypto. There are different ways, depending on the asset, of what that demand side could be. I think for something like Decred or Bitcoin, or these assets that are disinflationary going on deflationary, the benefit from spending has to outweigh the psychological cost of foregoing potential gains. And so it needs to be better than buying a cup of coffee. And this is where I don't know, there's potentially options like extending Politeia and still anchoring into Decred as a proof of work chain. And so then Decred becomes a governance chain. I think there are really interesting things to be done potentially with DCR time, which is Decred's timestamping. But the way we approach the demand side is we openly acknowledge it's an open question, but they have constructed a supply side with sustainability and adaptability such that we have conviction they will be around long enough to find killer applications and to bring on that demand side.
A really critical component of the demand side, as you mentioned, and I agree with the way that you set that out, is liquidity. So this event hopefully being one of many where we see fiat pairs for Decred, where we see other crypto pairs for Decred, where we see Decred listed and allowing consumers to access it. And Chris, you've been doing a lot of fantastic work around bootstrapping liquidity, working with service providers and so forth. Like, I view those as prerequisites to getting the demand side on board. It needs to be easy for people to access the asset in order to use it. So maybe you can talk about some of that.
Sure. It's one of the things we do at Placeholder is helping teams build out market infrastructure. We believe teams should be focused on the technology. And actually, we, as a venture firm that specializes in crypto, get economies of scale in knowing all of the custodians, knowing all of the exchanges, and being able to help our teams build those relationships and those integrations in a way that's much more efficient, because it's what we specialize in doing, whereas a team has to do it 0 to 60 all on their own each time that they want to do it. So that's been a big part of what we've been working on with Decred, because the Decred team has been focused pretty much solely on the technology. And that's why a lot of people just haven't heard about Decred and are surprised at the merits of the project when they do go deeper into it. I think so. That's say on the market infrastructure side. I think another potential demand driver in the next cycle will be people seeing Decred as a great alternative store of value to Bitcoin, with its hypersecure, adaptable, and sustainable properties. And this is where I understand the Bitcoin, say, minimalist or maximalist contingent that believe you should only hold Bitcoin. And I understand that worldview, and I've read the Bitcoin Standard, but I think that most investors, institutional investors that you end up talking with, or just your casual retail investors, are not comfortable with sole exposure to a single asset. And so finding alternative assets that are targeting similar visions in slightly different ways, I think becomes a short to medium term demand driver for Decred that sets it up for the longer term demand sides.
So great. Both Chris, you and Alex touched on liquidity and how exchanges can fit into the roadmap and the ultimate success of Decred. I think this is what the foundation of a healthy partnership might look like. Maybe would you be able to expand on the possible benefits of having a fiat pair available?
Sure. So I think fiat pairs are really important for crypto assets because it's an exogenous source of capital. And so if you're only quoted in crypto pairs, primarily being BTC and ETH, then you're really beholden to what's going on with those assets. And if value is draining out of those assets, then it's also going to be draining out of your asset. And so it's very helpful, I think, to have fiat pairs, particularly in bear markets, to just provide a steady flow of exogenous capital into the network. So I'm super happy that OKCoin is going to be providing a fiat pair to Decred. Decred definitely needs more fiat pairs. And then, liquidity broadly is an interesting question because generally, yes, you want these assets to be more liquid and so that there's not a lot of slippage if someone comes in. I think we have a lot of conversations internally about what is the liquidity profile necessary for different kinds of assets, because not every crypto asset is equal. And for governance crypto assets, maybe having some amount of illiquidity is actually a feature and not a bug, in that it makes it harder to amass a large amount of the asset, which is just another speed bump to trying to attack the network through amassing the asset. It's a half-baked thought, but I think there is something to not every crypto asset needs the exact same liquidity profile.
Okay, great. And as you folks are well aware, we will be listing Decred later on in the week. I think if you're familiar with OKCoin, if you've been following us for the last several weeks and months, we're very careful to select projects that we think are quality, that will benefit from additional liquidity, whose inclusion in our network and whose availability to our community will actually be positive for crypto development. And so we're excited. We're excited for this. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for speaking to these wonderful folks.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.